Good morning, members, officers and visitors who are viewing the live stream of this meeting. Welcome to this meeting of the Audit and Corporate Governance Committee. My name is Councillor Michael Atkins and I'm the chair of this committee. I'll introduce other attendees when I invite them to speak. Those in the chamber are reminded that the meeting is being live streamed. If you're joining us remotely, please ensure your camera and microphone remain off unless you're addressing the committee. If you're present in the room, please ensure your microphone is close to you and speak clearly when addressing the room. Item 1 on our agenda today is apologies for absence. Patrick, are there any apologies for absence today, please?
Yes, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillor Heather Williams and we understand that Councillor Mark Howell may well be late.
Thank you, Patrick. Item 2, declarations of interest. Do any members have any interests to declare in relation to any item of business on this agenda? Councillor Stobart.
Chair, thank you. So I'd like to remind the committee that I'm on the board of South Cambridgeshire Investment Partnership LLP, also South Cambridgeshire Projects. I think it's the first that gets the mentions in today's agenda.
Thank you. And Councillor Sanford?
Yes, I'm non-executive director of Ermine Street Homes, which may be mentioned in the paper somewhere.
Thank you very much. Any other declarations? Good. Item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. Are there any suggested amendments relating to the accuracy of the minutes for the meeting held on the 16th of May 2024? All right. I'll move that those minutes are a true and accurate record, and I'll sign those after the meeting. Are we all agreed? Thank you. Item 4 is public questions. No public questions have been received. So we move to item 5, the first substantive item. This is the annual governance statement for 2023-24 and is brought to this committee for approval. Could I please ask Mr. Tully to present this report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning to all members of the committee. We start off on page 9 of your agenda packs we're looking at the annual governance statement today. So the accounts and audit regulations, they require the council to review our governance arrangements and prepare an annual governance statement, which I'll often refer to as the abbreviated AGS, to accompany our statement of accounts. So the purpose of the AGS is to communicate how we're complying with our local code of governance, which is also included in our committee pack today. The actual full AGS starts on page 16 of the agenda packs. It's worth noting that if you look back historically, previously we included this within the statement of accounts itself, but recently for the last AGS and this one, we've done it as a separate document, which is fine. So the copy in the agenda pack is the one as was published on our website and is viewable at the moment as well. So moving on, you've probably heard me mention this quite a lot recently. The AGS should reflect the governance matters in the relevant financial year plus up to date the accounts assigned. And you've heard me say that a lot because it was only in January that we reviewed and approved the 2021-22 AGS, and then it was in May that we just looked at the 2022 to 2023 AGS. So consequently, there are not a lot of significant changes in our governance arrangements at the council at the time of publication since the previous reports. So despite this short time period, it's still a great opportunity to look back at our governance arrangements and what happened in the 2023 to 2024 financial year through our review of effectiveness. So it's worth noting that any material governance changes which happen between sort of today and the conclusion of the statement of accounts may need to be updated and recorded in the 2023-2024 AGS if relevant. So as I've explained before, we have this sort of little bit of timing differences at the moment. And that's why we sort of record significant events, such as things such as the best value notice and significant global events, which might span more than one financial year. So, with your approval, hopefully we can progress the document and move on to the statement of accounts afterwards. It's worth noting that we expect the AGS to be reviewed by the external auditors. As you would have mentioned and heard and discussed at previous committee meetings, there is a national backlog of external audits. This is our first AGS, which should be reviewed by colleagues, new external auditors, KPMG. So looking at the AGS itself, I always like to just highlight some of the key sections of it. It starts on page 16 of your packs. So the key points to note on page 19, this is where we document the roles and responsibilities in the council, which helps set up the framework for governance. There's been no change since the previous reports. On page 24, that's where we reference challenges to our local authority governance, and as I explained a minute ago, that will tend to span multiple years. It is broadly similar to the previous AGS. One thing I would mention is that we took on board feedback from the committee in May around some of the wording in there, so you will notice that that's been updated as well. On page 25, this is the real sort of meat, the main body of the document. That's our review of effectiveness, and that's our reflection on the 2023-2024 financial year, grouped to the 7 themes of corporate governance. On page 32, we have our conclusion, which concludes that we've got strong governance arrangements in place at the council. And then moving on, as we get to page 33 of the agenda pack, we have the local code of governance. So that is continually updated and reviewed. We review it in real time. And so you will have seen a couple of updates since the previous version, which came along to the committee in May. So that's very good. I've used track changes so you can see what they are. Basically some minor additions, adding a few extra things, but I will highlight on page 51, we've updated the high-level overview of the assurance framework. That's based on the 3 lines of defence model. We've incorporated overview and scrutiny into that. So that's following feedback and discussion at the previous committee meeting. So we thought that was a good thing to include. I'll mention that both professional bodies, SIPFA and the Local Government Association, they've been working on guidance on assurance frameworks. So we may continue to develop this sort of model in future. And then finally on page 52, I always like to promote and highlight the 7 principles of public life. No changes to that, but it's always good to promote these. So in summary, we've only just previously approved an AGS at the previous meeting, but this is moving along, so this is the next one for 2023-24, so it's pretty much bringing us up to date. Just for clarity, members have to approve this in advance of the statement of accounts, which follows next on the agenda. And we've also made some minor updates to the local code of governance. I hope that's useful. I'm happy to take any comments, feedback or questions you have.
Thank you very much. Members, any comments or questions for Mr. Tully? Councillor Leeming?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Tully. Through you, Chair, I would like to ask something about something that's on page 21, please. So there's a section in here which talks about significant things that have happened over the last year, and there's a section in the middle where it says the peer review team will be returning on the 12th of September to undertake a standard follow-up review, and that they'll report the findings subsequently, and they'll go on the council's website. Will these findings go anywhere else? Will they go to audit committee or to full council or to scrutiny? And I'd just like to ask how what sort of progress we're making with the recommendations from the peer review. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't actually know the question, but I don't know my colleague Mr. Maddox does, about whether it would go to another committee.
So, obviously the original report went via overview and scrutiny and cabinet. I'm expecting overview and scrutiny to get that. I'll need to double check, but that's my understanding because it would sort of make sense for them to get some feedback. We have been keeping up to date with all of the recommendations, and we do look at them on a sort of monthly basis. We did actually not too long ago go through it with cabinet members just to sort of check on progress. So, I mean, it's regularly updated. I will double check on what's actually going to happen, but my feeling is it would probably come through scrutiny and then on to cabinet as the first one did.
Thank you.
Councillor Stokebart.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and through you, just a few comments. So, first of all, yes, also page 21. This kind of, well, it's a summary of kind of significant events, but it would be useful to have a timeline, I think, and maybe that comment should apply to future versions of the annual governance statement, but to see a timeline and how things proceeded one after the other, whether it was a busy patch or whatever, would be, I think, a useful adjunct to this summary, if you will, of events. So, I mean, it's not a huge thing, but I think it would help with the understanding of the progress through the year when things happened. And I think, yeah, with respect to the corporate peer challenge, of course, that happened. Then there was the report. Then there was a kind of period of consideration and scrutiny and overview, looked at the action plan, produced a number of recommendations, which have resulted in some activity. And then, of course, there's the return of the team on the 12th. So that's quite a time-related thing. I think to understand that in the context of this document would add to its value. So perhaps not now, but future versions, I think a timeline, a diagrammatic timeline would be helpful. I think the summary against the Nolan principles, that's on page 26 and following is very helpful summary. I was interested in the criteria that were applied to selecting those events, and is there a selection of the good and the bad, the lessons learned as well as the achievements made. And again, that's a broad comment, but it'd be helpful to have a clarification as to on the criteria as to how those events were selected. And then just one thing, and actually it came up in employment and staffing yesterday, the decision to change the arrangements for paternity leave, or for payments in relation to paternity leave, should that feature? And that's just a kind of question of detail. So three things, I guess. A timeline, perhaps for future versions of the AGS. What were the criteria? And this detail question, I've got another detail thing as well. On page, the mention of JDCC, which isn't JDCC. I think through you, Chair, Mr. Tully, I mentioned this last time, and maybe it kind of slipped through, but the Joint Planning Committee with Cambridge City Council is the Joint Development Control Committee, or JDCC. Let me see if I can find, yes, page 38, item 4. So as it's capitalised, I think we ought to probably give it the right title. Sorry, Chair, that was a bit of a ramble, but I hope...
No, thank you. Very, very helpful, Councillor Stobart. Mr. Tully, is there anything you want to pick up out of?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you for some feedback there. It's always helpful to get the feedback from committee members. It's a very interesting point about the graphics. It's something I'll take away and have a think about how we can do that. Certainly one of the challenges we have is to try and make this document engaging. It is a lot of words. It is meant to be a sort of a public document. So yeah, anything that we can do to improve that is always very helpful. So I'll have a think about that. Thanks for that suggestion. The criteria for significant events is an interesting one. I mean, there's no hard, fast rules around this. The guidance, which has been published by professional bodies, CIPFA and Solid a while ago, is quite old, and it doesn't really give specific indications. But through networking with organisations like CIPFA and colleagues and reviewing other reports out there, we sort of incrementally sort of get a feel for what the sort of things we would classify as material events. I would suggest it's something which is going to have an impact on this council, potentially, and the governance arrangements. And sort of the purpose of this document here is also to provide assurance to the readers that we're responding to it and sort of managing it. So that's the sort of feeling, the logic behind those statements, rather than being a hard and fast sort of set of rules. The paternity leave, interesting one. I'll probably take that away and have a bit of a think. I think given the timing of it, I suppose the question would be whether it would feature in the following year's AGS, potentially. I can see hands being raised there. Did you want to come in at that point? Or?
Only, Jonathan, to say that I think the question was, should employment staffing be included in the governance structure, because it has got powers to change conditions for example, golden handshakes and paternity leave and things like that, it does have some powers to spend money, basically.
Right.
And should they be included in your table under governance structures?
Brilliant. Sorry, apologies. And thank you for the clarification. I appreciate that. Yes, so certainly in the table at the top under the roles and responsibilities is what we're considering. Yeah, we'll take that away and have a think about that. That's a good suggestion. And then, yeah, finally, the comment about I've made a note about the Joint Planning Committee, so we'll get that updated. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Redrup?
Thank you, Chair. It's just a question about presentation and accessibility. I mean, I do appreciate that there are images and graphics in there, but I just worry about the embedded text within it and whether that's available to everyone. You know, when there's tables, we can select that text, so you imagine that could be read out like by a machine reader if needed, but where we have lots of content in graphics, that might be more difficult. And also there was one where some of the colours just made it a little bit difficult for me to read, so
Okay.
just, I think that was the bright one, the bright circle one, sort of early on in the AGS. So just, I don't know what the answers are, but just things to take under consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Thank you. Useful feedback. When we produce the document Word to start off with, and we do sort of like run an accessibility check on it, I'll happy to go speak to comms as well and see if they've got any further tips. The graphic that you refer to, yes, that's got a lot of bright colours. It was taken, just lifted straight from the original source, and we could probably recreate that and do it in something that's more easy on the eye, for sure. Yeah, so I'll be happy to take that away as well.
Thank you. Are there any further comments or questions for Mr. Tully? Thank you. Just for my own part, I'd just like to commend you on your summary of the excitement around the 4-day week included in. I thought that was a very balanced and factual summary of what's happened up to date. I did have one question, which is just on the timings, because clearly we're considering the draft accounts today, but we're not considering the final accounts today. If there are significant events between, say, now and December, do we need to reflect those back into the annual governance statement, or will they form part of the previous year's, the subsequent year's statement?
Yeah, a brilliant question, something we're having to try and deal with, understand with the backlog of accounts. I would suggest if it was a material change to the annual governance statement, I would like to bring it back to the committee just to make you aware of the change. Yeah, for completeness, I think that would be appropriate. Thank you. Yeah, no, I think if there are any kind of significant changes, you know, kind of within the next 6 months that really should be reflected, then I'd like to see those, see that brought back to the committee, please. Thank you. So we have been asked to agree and approve the annual governance statement. Can we take that by affirmation? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tully. Item 6 is the draft accounts for financial year 2023-24. The main item is item 6. The accounts themselves are in Appendix A. Could I please ask Mr. Maddock to present this report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. So you have before you the 23-24 draft accounts. These were published on the website at the end of June, and our public inspection period runs from the 9th up to the 9th of August. So it's the intention to issue the accounts to KPMG in due course. You'll note that the date for the audit starts in November 2024. We expect the process to last maybe 3 months, but it remains to be seen exactly how long and how well that goes. It's possible there may be some amendments to the accounts. And again, if these are significant, they will be reported back to this committee at its meeting in September. And obviously there's still time then before the audit will commence. So the draft accounts are set out at Appendix A. It's quite a lot of pages, as you can imagine. I've put down some narrative in relation to key differences between last year and this year. I wasn't proposing to go through them, but just to point out that we'd surmised at the last meeting that there might be a surplus on the pension fund, and there is indeed a surplus on the pension fund. So we're a little bit in uncharted territory, but we've sought the proper accounting treatment of that from people who have previously done it and from experts in the field. So that's been included in the accounts, and they're actually included under long-term debtors. So previously we showed something under liabilities for the pension liability, but it's now treated as a long-term debtor within the accounts. So we're asking you to approve the accounts in their draft form, but I'm happy to take any questions, comments, thoughts at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Maddock. So just to clarify then, so even though it's now a pension asset, effectively, we're still showing it in we're showing it on the asset
So
side.
we're showing
So
on the asset side as a long-term debtor.
As a long-term debtor. Understood. And do we anticipate how that will kind of change or evolve? I mean, there's a valuation relatively imminent of the
So we've got,
as a whole.
yes, we'll have a triennial valuation coming up fairly soon. I'm thinking that's 26, 27. I'll need to double check. And it'd be interesting to see actually what comes out of that. I mean, things can obviously change fairly quickly, but yeah, it'd be interesting to see what comes out of that and how that affects things going forward.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions for Mr. Maddock on the draft set of accounts? Councillor Leeming?
Thank you, Chair. I have 4 questions, if that's okay. So my first question is about page 77. There is a note, that's page 19 of the statement of accounts, it's 77 in our pack. So there's a section here about accounting standards that have been issued but haven't been adopted yet. There's a whole, I think there's 6 of them. I wondered whether any of these are anticipated to have a material impact on our financial position in the future. That was my first question.
So we're not expecting to have a material impact. I did think we said that in there somewhere, but maybe not. Oh, I beg your pardon. Yeah, it's at the top of the next page. Yeah. So certainly our assessment is that they won't have a material impact, but obviously we'll keep it under review as we go along.
Sorry. What sort of things, where will they hit? Are they mostly sort of disclosure issues, or are they things that will eventually run through the reserves and the prime statements?
So let me have a look. I suspect a lot of them will be around disclosure issues.
Yeah, if I may, I think the one that I would focus on would probably be the kind of new world of leases that we're going into with the kind of, because I think a lot of us will have been trained on this world of financing leases and operating leases, and my very rough understanding is a lot of that's being kind of swept away. But I don't know, I don't get the sense we're an authority that's engaged in lots of complex sale and lease backs and that kind of financial engineering, which I think is the kind of stuff that's going to get a bit unpicked. But so yeah, I think if our lease position is relatively straightforward, I think that would be the main issue I would foresee.
We'll certainly be reviewing this again as time goes by, and something may become clearer that's a bit more significant. But certainly our initial assessment is that there's not likely to be any significant effect. And as Councillor Atkins says, we haven't got a massive number of leases.
Thank you. So my second question relates to page 83.
I'm so sorry, Chairman, for interrupting. Could you also give because on the computer it doesn't give the page numbers. Okay. Could you give the report number as well, please?
Yes,
thank you, Chairman.
Of
sorry.
Course. No, that's fine. 83 in the pack, but in the report it's page 25. So this is movements in earmarked reserves. I can see that there's some significant movements in the year. The 2 that I was most interested in are the movement on renewables and the movement on homelessness. And I wondered what the rationale was behind these increases. Well, it's an increase in the homelessness provision, I think. Oh no, it's other. It's the other line. Hang on, I'm following this across. There's the other line, which is it's a big increase, and I wondered what was in there. And the other one is the renewables. That's had a big transfer out, and I wondered what that was about, please.
I think that might be a transfer, in. It's all back to front, the signage. But yes, the transfer into renewables.
Yeah, so Cabinet have made a decision over the last few years to use the gain from the business rates pool and put it into the renewables reserve. We are building our renewables reserve up a little bit because going forward we're going to be investing potentially in some electric vehicles, and some of that will be coming from this reserve, as indeed the REN project, the renewables energy project in Waterbeach, some of that's being funded from this reserve. So we are at the moment building it up to spend in future years, if that makes sense. Sorry about my... Yeah, I was just trying to think
Draw down on this other then.
So we're adding 1.3. Yeah, I'm not actually sure off the top of my head what that is. I'm just trying to see if I can tell by what other ones there are on there. I think I'm probably going to have to check on what the detail is behind that, because off the top of my head I can't think. I mean, we had a similar addition last year. I think it may be helpful to take that one out of other and list it separately.
Yes, I think if there is something significant in there, I think, particularly as Councillor Lehman points out, it is one of the faster growing reserve balances. I think it needs perhaps a little clarity. So
Thank you.
if you could maybe circulate an explanation to the committee, and when we look at this again in the context of, so I mean, I'm happy to approve it today as draft, but then when we have the final accounts with the audit report, if we could have a bit more detail on that.
Yeah, I think given it's quite a big increase, there probably is something in there that's a bit more significant that we should list separately. So thanks, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, my third question is through the housing revenue account. So that's page 111 of the report and page 53 of the document itself. So this is a large impairment on the housing revenue account. I was trying to understand, this local authority housing fund, is this a national sort of valuation or is it local? Is this a sort of, I'm just trying to understand whether this is a sort of academic book exercise of an impairment or whether it's based on something that's tangible. Thank you.
So thank you. The valuation of our housing stock is based on a prescribed formula, and we value it at existing use for social housing. Now, it is primarily a book valuation. It's a judgment carried out by our valuers as to what level that valuation should be. I mean, I probably need to see if there's anything specific, but my feeling is it's probably a general reduction in values in relation to housing properties over the period and towards the end of 23-24. So let's see if there's any more narrative there that's yes, it talks about the adjustment factor. So the valuation is based on 38% of its open market value. So there's a significant factor adjustment downwards on valuation based on the fact there's a sitting tenant in that property. And I'm assuming there was just, when the valuations were carried out, there was just a reduction in the values. I can find out more detail.
Thank you. So is it something that's applied across the entire housing stock then? It's a sort of formula across the whole housing stock as a sort of book exercise, as opposed to something that's come from local information about a specific group of properties, for instance? Or...
So, yeah, so our valuers will look at properties in our district. So it is district, it is based on the values in the district. So obviously a value of property in a different part of the country would be affected differently. So it's based on local values. So I think they look at a lot of information around property values in the district. And I say that is then brought down by that. So the 38% is just for the east of England. There's different factors for other parts of the country. So, for example, if it was a property in the West Midlands, there's a different reduction factor as well. So it's partly the calculations prescribed nationally, but obviously the valuations themselves are based on local information. You see what I mean?
So just to be clear, so when it says east of England, would that be an aggregate, say, with Cambridge and, say, I don't know, Norwich and Great Yarmouth, or is it specifically local to our housing market?
So the values are specific to our area.
Right.
The adjustment factor is for the whole of east of England, so you'd adjust it down to 38% whether you were in Cambridge or Great Yarmouth. But obviously the initial valuations, presumably, I don't know that much about Great Yarmouth, but presumably, presumably the values in Great Yarmouth are lower than Cambridge, so your starting point's lower. Sure. So again, when you apply the 38%, the ending point is also lower, isn't it? Yeah. So it's a little bit messy and complicated.
I'd be interested to see how this plays out in the audit. Thank you.
If you like,
Andrew.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, Councillor. So part of our work is definitely to look at the housing revenue account because it's such a large element of your accounts. We have our specialist in-house valuers that will look at the assumptions made by your valuers across all the different aspects of and the different types of asset that you have, including housing. The adjustment that Peter referred to is something that's regional, so we do look that the right regional adjustment is made. Funny, well, not funny, but there are some councils that make the wrong adjustment, thinking that they belong in a different region for some reason because they think they're closer to London, so the regional factor doesn't affect them. But you have to stick to the regional factors that you sit within. The valuation, as Peter said, by your valuers, hopefully specialists in terms of housing and social housing, they'll look at the different types of housing that you have, so whether it's a 2-storey, a 1-storey, or a flat, and they'll make different assumptions. So our specialist valuers, when they look at their valuations, will also take into consideration how they've broken up the blocks of your housing stock and the other assets, and then they will review those assumptions for how reasonable they are, and then they will feed that back to me and my team, and then we'll take a view as to whether or not the amounts that are shown in your accounts are reasonable as well, and that's where we come up with our assessment.
Thank you. Just on this particular point, so the increase in impairment was about 14 million. Sorry, I'm sure it's in the account somewhere, but just to save me scrolling, what's the kind of rough total book value of the property? So that 14 million as a percentage would be, is that a kind of large impairment? Is that a small impairment?
My guess is it's relatively small.
That was my guess as well. But
I was just going to I think it's note 12 where we show the table of that property values. So if you just bear with me, have a quick look. Yeah, so note 12, property, plant and equipment, you'll see the first column. Sorry, this is page 85 or 27, depending which version you've got. So on note 12, the first column, you'll see the net book value of our council properties.
so it's that 600,000 roughly figure.
Yeah.
So 14 million, looking at about kind of 2.5%.
Yeah, quite 2.5%.
Okay. That seems, I could sort of believe that property values have dropped by about 2% in a kind of 12-month period. That feels plausible.
And certainly from some of the research we did, we felt that the valuations were about right. But obviously, Andrew,
as we've said, it will be checked in some mind-numbing detail for some unfortunate audit assistant. Councillor Leeming, did you have a fourth? Sorry.
I do have one fourth question. It's back to the opening balances and the disclosures and what guidance we've been given about the previous accounts and how that's been treated publicly and how it will feed into what comes next.
Do you mind if I hold that question just to the next item when we're talking in detail, I think, about the audit plan? Thank you. Any further comments or questions from members of the committee? Councillor Samford.
Apologies, a very minor semantic point. Page 4 in the narrative summary refers to an independent group. My understanding is that it takes at least 2 members to make a group, so the single independent is not a group. That's actually quite significant because until it's a group, he's not eligible to sit on committees.
Thank you for that clarification. Yes, just if we can just check that we're accurately representing the governance situation at the council, that would be good.
Thanks. Yeah.
Final question from me, which I guess if for anyone is for Mr. Tully. So obviously we appreciate, and we're about to come on to how this set of accounts will be audited, but I think we understand that the opening balances will not be looked at in detail, or vice versa, the kind of closing balances of the previous accounts. Is there a piece of work perhaps that you and your team could do over the next couple of months just to give a level of assurance? It doesn't need to be full assurance, but whether there is, given that this is a kind of carrying over set of figures that will receive a lot less scrutiny, or slightly or less scrutiny than they would normally, whether that might be a productive use of your team's time just to delve into those numbers. Is that something that you'd be willing to take on?
Thank you, Jay. Yeah, I'm happy to take that away. We'll have a chat with Peter and think about the best way we can look in providing that level of assurance. Yeah, thank you for the suggestion.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we don't want to kind of interfere with the kind of forthcoming audit, but clearly we've got until November, and if we can, I think if we find any errors between now and then that we can fix, it will make the audit that much easier if we've kind of fixed a problem in the opening balances. So thank you. So I think there are 1 or 2 amendments which I believe Mr. Maddock has a note of, and I'm sure Patrick will help remind him, and indeed it's all been recorded, so you can go back and check. So 1 or 2 minor amendments, but subject to those amendments, are we happy to approve this draft set of... Oh, Councillor Stobart.
Chair, thank you. If we are in that domain of minor adjustments, I've lost my place, but there is a mention in the partnership section at the beginning about South Cambridgeshire projects being a joint venture or a partnership with Balfour Beatty. It's actually Balfour Beatty Investments, BBI, as opposed to BB, the bigger organisation. Yeah.
Thank you. They're the kind of people that might read these accounts, so let's get their name correct. Thank you. So subject to the amendments, those kind of minor amendments that we've mentioned, are we happy to approve this draft set of accounts? Thank you very much indeed, and thank you, Mr. Maddock, for you and your team's work on getting us to this point. It's been a very rapid 12 months of progress, and as a committee, I'm sure we're very delighted to see that. Item 7 is an update from our new external auditors at KPMG on the audit plan for 2023-24. I'm delighted to say we're joined by Mr. Andrew Cardoza from the lead audit partner from KPMG, and I'd like to ask him to present his update. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Audit Director, not quite partner. I'd love to be promoted, but not just yet. It's great to have a set of accounts that Peter and his team have shared with us. We've been working with you now for the past 3 to 4 months. So getting to know you, getting to know the systems, getting to know the kind of controls that you have in place. We've also been on site, which is one of the things that you asked us about. So we actually did have one of our team members here, which again, Peter and the team really appreciated that Shania was able to come down, go through some stuff with people face to face, which is always much easier. But also it's quite obvious that people aren't used to auditors, which is a shame. So they're not quite used to what we require, not quite used to kind of the level of information we're asking for and the quality of the information we're requiring. It has been slow. I've talked to Peter about this. We have regular calls with Peter and the team, with Fazana, etc. And they're really helpful because we can progress things and highlight things that are outstanding. But it has been slow, and we have spent a lot more time than we planned for as part of our audit plan and the high-level plan that we brought to you. We've shared the additional time that we have spent with Peter and the team, and we've broken that down in a detailed spreadsheet of who spent the time, why it's extra as well, compared to what we would normally spend on a call it a normal audit of a council your size, plus the additional time that will need to be completed to make sure that we complete all our audit planning and risk assessment work before we can then get to the November stage when we actually carry out the final accounts audit. So again, all of that is detailed, all of that's broken down for Peter and his team to review. And I think without putting words into Peter's mouth, he accepted. This is the first year we're getting to know, we're getting to know you, you're getting to know us, and you're getting to know what we require. So it's taken a bit longer, unfortunately. And obviously there's a cost to that, which is why I broke it down for Peter, and which we will bring to committee in due course as well. Notwithstanding that, it's good, as I said, to actually be on, getting on with the audit, getting to know you. We've also had detailed conversations with EY about reviewing their file in due course when they get to a point where they can actually sign off a disclaimed opinion on 23-24. Absolute brilliant question in terms of opening balances, and something that just before the election was called, there was a paper in the minister's hand for him to sign in terms of legislation, in terms of what was going to happen on disclaimed opinions, what would be the impact for the incoming auditors like KPMG, in terms of the fact that if EY, which undoubtedly they are, going to disclaim your 23-24 accounts opinion, then as you said, the opening balance, we have no comfort over that. What we're trying to do within KPMG is actually, we've got a working group that's looking at where can we get comfort on the balances that are in your accounts, where we don't have to rely on the opening balances. So certain things where you've got a full valuation, which we've talked to Peter and the team about, then that takes a lot of risk away from us in terms of that. If that's been done by an independent valuer, then a big chunk of your numbers that are the asset values, if they've been valued in year for the end of March 24, then that gives us a lot of comfort. Obviously, our specialists will go through that. We've also looked at things like debtors and creditors, etc., where you don't have to rely so much on what's gone through from previous, but it's about what happens in the year. So again, we can get quite a lot of comfort from that ourselves. On the pension side, again, we're working hard to make sure that we can do our own work on the pensions rather than rely on your pension fund auditors. And again, that will give us that control over that. But again, that's down to legislation that comes through from government. We're waiting for the FRC, Financial Regulatory Council, plus the NAO to give us the guidance on opening balances. And again, once they've got that guidance, we'll match that up to the work that we've done. And hopefully we'll be aligned in terms of what their thinking and our thinking is. From the conversations we've had, kind of behind closed doors, they have acknowledged that what we're doing is in line with what their thinking is, and they're quite grateful for the fact that we've actually helped progress their thinking as well. So that's quite a good place to be in their view as well. The other thing just to mention from our side is in terms of IFRS 16, which is one of the big things which will come through and something that you will have to put through, as you asked about, Councillor. That does take a lot of work. It's minor in terms of the material impact on the accounts, but there's a lot of work to actually gather the information together in one place. And certainly the work that we've done in other public sector sectors, like housing and the NHS, where they've had to do the leasing accounting for the first time, has taken a lot of time to gather that. And again, something we'll talk to Peter and his team about is in terms of those first few months of actually gathering that information together. We talked about the HRA, we talked about the housing balances. It's great that Mr. Tully went through the AGS, because that is a massive part of what we have to understand and give us an understanding about you as an organisation and how reflective you are as an organisation, and where are the gaps, where are the things that you have to improve, but also talk about the positives as well, which sometimes people miss, which is good to see as part of yours. The pensions turning into an asset is something that we've seen across all the bodies that we're auditing now in local government, which is an odd place to be because it's always been a liability. So again, in terms of how that's accounted for, and in terms of the future impact, in terms of how you deal with that as a liability as opposed to something that you have to fund, then we need to make sure that it's still prudent and it's still considered carefully by your Director of Finance. So yeah, so we're making good progress. We're on target for the November visit. Hopefully we can start a bit earlier, maybe October, given where we are. We've got the resources ready. We're already in and doing external audits at Milton Keynes, at Telford, at central beds. So again, we've got the teams in place. We're already kicking off with the 23-24 audits. So again, we'll learn from those audits, and we'll bring that learning here, and hopefully make it as efficient as possible and get it done before the year end, which is what my main aim is. So we're some way towards getting back onto a normal track. The opening balances issue does cause an issue for me in terms of I won't be able to sign a clean opinion, even though, fingers crossed, there's nothing wrong with your accounts, but we can't place reliance on the opening balances, so there'll be a note on the opinion. The following year, because the comparatives are still an issue, again, that will be a note in the opinion. And then the third year, so long as there's nothing wrong with your accounts, then that's the first time you'll have a clean opinion from KPMG. Hope that makes sense. Happy to take questions, Chair.
Thank you very much. One question from me, and then I think perhaps I'll come back to Councillor Leeming, who I interrupted earlier, and then other members of the committee. You mentioned, I think it sounds like you've already been in discussions with Mr. Maddock as to the kind of potential extra time and potential extra costs that you needed to incur in order to carry out your audit planning work. On the face of it, that sounds very reasonable and very sensible to me. However, I think it might be wise if that's information that could be shared with the committee kind of by circulation sooner rather than later. I think we would appreciate understanding the picture as it evolves rather than sort of being presented with the full situation in, say, kind of 3-6 months' time. I think kind of let's bring the committee on that journey as we observe. So I think if between the two of you something could be shared with the committee as to what those kind of additional costs have been and what that
I'm happy to share the numbers as an approximate now, if you want, in terms of hours as opposed to cost. If Peter's happy with that.
If you've got a verbal update now, that would be great. But I think, and then something by writing to the committee, just so it's less of a surprise further down the line, I think would be sensible.
Yeah, I think that's
Is that okay, Peter? Yeah. So do you want me to? Yeah. So,
yep.
I mean, from our point of view, the additional time that it's taken so far is 150 hours. The additional time to complete, and this isn't just that we're making this up, this is detailed, I promise, is another 150 hours. So there's 300 hours already in addition to the time that we've planned.
Thank you. That's helpful to get that context and that scale. Oh no! I quite understand. No, that's fine. Councillor Leeming, did you want to come in on your previous question?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Yes, you've partly answered my question already. Thank you about the closing opening balances thing. Do you know how many of the local authorities are in the same position as us, waiting for these things? And do you know any more about the timescale? I mean, I know I'm asking you to conjure things out of thin air, and especially since we've had the change in government, it's possibly even more complicated now. But do we have any idea roughly when we're going to get some clarity about what to do with these balances, please?
Yeah. As I said, just before the election, the paper was in front of the minister for him to sign the legislation. The election was called. Obviously, the new minister is in place. Hopefully, he'll see, or she, I think it's a he, apologies. The minister will see the paper, see that it was ready, prepared by his civil servants, etc. There's nothing controversial in it. It's just about moving the backlog and getting it cleared. So hopefully the minister will sign that. But again, there's other things that are at the top of their agenda right now. Sadly, the backlog in accounts, audits, it doesn't quite hit the mark. We're hoping that will come out by the end of August. We hope that it will come out by the end of March. We're now at the end of August, which is a shame because there's just a lot of time that's just been spent with when everyone could have just carried on, and certainly EY are not going to sign your disclaimed opinion until they see that legislation, until they see what's required from them. From our point of view, in terms of how many, we picked up 75 external audits of local government. Of those, 40 will be disclaimed, which is much more than we ever expected. So we're progressing with the 30 that we have got opinions on for the 22-23 audits, and where we haven't got a disclaimed opinion as well, such as at Milton Keynes, then I'm still cracking on with the audit in terms of I've got the team there, they're ready, they've got their accounts ready, and they wanted us to progress that. So we're progressing that. At a point, we will grind to a halt because we don't know what the opinion is from EY. And again, we'll just have to wait till they sign that opinion before we can then complete. here, obviously with discussions with officers as to when was the best time to come in, when the accounts would be ready, when the working papers would be ready. It was late October, November, which again is fine, but it's just making sure that at some point we bring that back into a normal cycle. Nationally, there's still 1,000 audit opinions that are outstanding.
Thank you. It's really helpful to have it put in context and some estimates about timescales, which I know I'm asking you to conjure things out of the air, but thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any further comments or questions for Mr. Cardoza or Mr. Maddock on this matter? I think one question just for me is the kind of October-November timescale sounds very sensible. I suppose my only concern would be the workload on your team as we tick over into the new year, because I imagine that's probably peak business planning, budgeting, kind of key reports to council coming in March. So how are you thinking about kind of workforce planning around, you know, I can see that being a very, very busy kind of 5 months for you if you're trying to close up the audit on the one hand and also, you know, needing to prepare quite detailed work for Cabinet and Council.
So, thank you. So a lot of the working papers are obviously being collated as we speak. So we started that project now. So we should have a lot of that side of things done before we start the budget process. With 21-22, we had a similar situation where we did have the budget process and and some audit work going on at the same time. So it was quite difficult to manage. I think, you know, inevitably it will be a little difficult to manage. I'm having regular discussions with Fazana about how we best manage that, and she'll be drawing up a detailed timetable for both pieces of work, because in the budget process it tends to be a couple of weeks when there's a lot of work, then it sort of slackens off a bit, so it's going to be a little bit of moving between one and the other. We have a couple of people with us who have helped us get up to speed. We're thinking we're probably only going to need one of those going forward, certainly for this first period. I think after we get to the year end, or the calendar year end, we'll probably be fine. But I think just to make sure, I think it's wise to keep one of those people on just about at a little bit more capacity at the busy time, just to make sure that we get through. So that's the thinking. It's not been finalised yet, but that's the thinking at this stage.
That sounds sensible. I mean, it might be worth keeping that extra person, perhaps even until January, February, just to kind of, just in case things, you know, do slip slightly, or if there are kind of follow-on queries, having answered earlier queries, either on the budget or the audit for that matter. But it sounds like the preparatory work is well in hand, so thank you. So we've been asked to note this update, which indeed we have. Thank you, Mr. Cardoza, for joining us today. We do appreciate your presence and your openness and honesty in the challenges that we're currently facing. So thank you. Item 8 is a report on the draft fraud strategy. The committee is being asked to consider this, and if approved, we will recommend it to Cabinet for adoption. Please could I ask Tara Nutt-Beam-King to present this report?
So I'll just give a brief.
We'll go to Mr. Maddock first,
yeah.
and then to Tara.
So I'd just like to introduce my colleague, Tara Nutt-Beam-King. She leads on anti-fraud risk assessment and fraud investigation. The fraud strategy itself, this was last considered by this committee back in July 2021, and then was adopted by Cabinet on 24th September 2021. I think it's fair to say there's been quite a lot of work gone into updating this since the COVID pandemic, and some of the issues around the business grants and the lack of fraud prevention that was in place when those were paid out. There's been quite a lot coming out from central government around assessing fraud risk and fraud impacts, and obviously the council has substantial processes, deals with substantial amounts of money, so it's right that we consider fraud risk and fraud impact properly. Tara and the team have been in close contact with central government and other organisations in relation to this. So as a result of that work, a lot of that has gone into the fraud strategy. We've done substantial work with housing, particularly in relation to tenancy fraud, as this is a particularly significant area that seems to be at the fore at the moment. And you may well have seen recently we've had a couple of successes, prosecutions in relation to tenancy fraud. So the fraud strategy is presented to this committee for comment. Any questions? But broadly, it's more adding to the strategy rather than amending the strategy. There are a few amendments, but a lot of it is additions to the strategy in the light of events over the last 3 to 4 years. So, yeah, just throw the floor open to any questions, comments, thoughts in relation to the strategy.
Thank you. Ms. Nutbing-Kim, did you have anything to add at this point?
I think that Peter's covered most of the main points, to be honest with you. So if there are any questions that you'd like to pose, then I'm happy to take them.
Thank you. Do members of the committee, Councillor Howell?
Yes, thank you. Just a couple of little questions, really. I'm really pleased to see this. I'm really, really happy to see this. I might have missed it, but I didn't see anything to do with the licensing department. Is licensing going to be a separate issue, especially with regards to taxi fraud and different forms of licensing with that? That's the first question. And also, the only time I've ever been involved with fraud in this council, it's always been something internal. I wasn't actually doing the fraud myself, but just wanted to make that clear. But it was always internal fraud in regards to members of staff, and I don't see a lot about that either in this. But again, I might have missed it, or it might be something. I wonder if somebody could just go on about that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So in terms of licensing, we've got an enterprise level risk assessment. So when we've put that together, and that was during the COVID pandemic, we worked with lots of different departments to say we'd like you to look at what your potential fraud risk is. And we did consult with licensing. So there should be an entry that's on there, but I'll need to refer back to it because obviously it's an evolving document. And as processes change, it needs to be updated, etc. But we did consult with licensing. So although they may have a separate process, because their processes are quite robust, if you're from a licensing background, you'll know that in terms of the public...
Which, of course, you are.
Yes. Yeah. So in terms of their processes when it comes to protecting the public, that is quite a robust process around that, or at least it used to be anyway. I'm not sure exactly what happens now, but they will have quite significant checks that are put in place, and we have discussed some of the support that we can give them in terms of ID verification, etc. But I understand that they're actually progressing something independently as part of their licensing package. So that's something that I can go back and speak to them about. But just to give you some assurance, you'll know from the licensing process that there are lots of checks that they need to go through to verify that people are who they say they are and that they are safe to be working in that area. But of course, there will always be threats around it. I do believe it's on the enterprise level risk assessment. So we'll just go back and have a look, and we can revisit that if it's an area of particular concern.
Well, I'm just wondering, is this the opportunity to take where we write a fraud strategy and all departments are involved in it instead of being independently standing alone in each one? It's a bigger project, I know, and it's not going to be done overnight. But I'm wondering if this is the time, now we've done this one, they've got theirs, that we start looking at combining all the fraud strategies as one solid document we can refer to. It's just a thought, Chairman, and I think the officers should go in, think about it, maybe come back just to say, look, if this is just not possible for one reason or the other. The other small question I asked is about internal fraud.
Yes, okay. What we've focused on this is what we see the main areas at the moment of threat to the authority. We know that insider fraud is on the increase, and we do acknowledge that. In terms of looking at fraud risk assessment, if you look at, I'll refer back to the enterprise level, there is quite a lot of detail around how insider fraud could be committed, and there's a view over that. But what we also have in place in terms of when we're looking at the employment and recruitment process is quite robust. So at the moment we've implemented a new identification service that can check certain things about individuals. So it's called Trust ID, and that's something that's being used by HR and recruitment. So that will take confirm a live picture of the person that's actually applying for the job, whether they've got the right to work, etc. in the UK. So that's been a really useful tool. And there are quite robust procedures with managers about what kind of items we check when we are recruiting, so in terms of qualifications and things like that. But there's also the work around education that we do, and we are now running our check-ins, if you like, so we're accessible to people. So we have a drop-in session that we run broadly every month or so, where we'll say, has anyone got any concerns about any kind of activity or something that they're not quite sure about, that they want to talk to us about, and we can also direct them to things like our whistleblowing policy. But also, you might have noticed there is an amendment in this, which is just opening that door in terms of professional standards for people to actually come forward to HR or an appropriate manager and say they're concerned about something, or there's they believe there's an error, and to be able to take that forward early on.
Thank you. I'm just seeing lots of documents. We've got the whistleblowing documents. We've got, and that's I think goes back to my original statement thing. Also, just one more thing, heaven forbid, but also there's nothing mentioned in here about members being involved in fraud as well. And, it would like to think that members don't do anything, but I think, unless it is in there, I missed it, I'm sorry. But I do think that somehow all that should be brought together under one single document. But again, that's a suggestion, and I would like somebody to just come back to me, or through the chairman, whatever, what they do. But thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I think some really excellent points in terms of kind of thinking about all the different angles and making sure that this document doesn't end up a bit sort of isolated and a bit of an island from other areas. I wonder if in between now and it going to cabinet, I think there is probably space somewhere for a sentence or two about how perhaps the importance of the licensing procedure and how that can help prevent fraud. Whether that's in the responsibilities section for the head of licensing, or whether that's or perhaps even in the protect section, whether a kind of short paragraph there. Even if we don't kind of formally kind of merge things at this point, I think just kind of establishing those links would be really helpful. And I think yes, perhaps reflect on those comments about kind of staff, the risks of sort of inside fraud either by staff or members. And whether we're fully capturing that in the document. I hope that's some helpful feedback on those points. Any further? Sorry, Councillor Stobart, you indicated.
Chair, thank you. So just two comments. The first on comparison with other organisations, and we might call that broadly benchmarking. But just looking through the document, there is a mention of participation in data and intelligence analysis exercises. There's emphasis on training, so perhaps taking into account the experiences of others in fraud detection and prevention. So I just would like to pose the question, is there enough of kind of benchmarking and comparison so that we're not kind of trying to learn the whole process ourselves as South Cams, but we're relying on other people's insights as well, particularly when we might be isolated, from some of the newer types of fraud that are being perpetrated. That might even be international in outlook, because I think, some fraud schemes can actually cross national borders. The second comment, quite different, was on using advanced technology, and this suggests more perhaps imaginative use of software and data techniques. So, from the fields that that I worked in, things like a sudden outlier or a burst in variance on something that you measure would be ways of doing that. But of course, we're talking about very complex situations here. So my question is really around the resourcing of that. Are we going to commit enough resources that the team can actually use the best of current technologies and draw on the kind of experience that we would regard as, as state of the art, if you will. So two things. Are we benchmarking ourselves well? And are there resources available for some more advanced techniques that we would need, to be really sharp in this area?
Thank you.
Thank you. So if we just take the first question around benchmarking, we would obviously look to see what the central government standards were and that kind of gold level standard and how it translates into local government. So at the moment we've got some really interesting projects that we're running, and it touches on what you've said in the second question as well. We're working with local partners on projects around identifying things from intelligence-led investigation, from data matching within our National Fraud Initiative, to identify things like single person discount fraud, and that's been really, really successful. And so that we know that from the Fighting Fraud Locally plan, where the perceived highest risks are, they are around single person discounts, council tax frauds, housing frauds. So I think that we are working in line with partners to develop a fraud hub, which is hopefully something that we're going to see in the future. But you are correct, we do need support and funding to be able to do that. And it's something that we've discussed so it's something we discuss frequently, but that we've also developed, and there is going to be, I think I can say there's a business case around.
I think it's probably something for later. Okay. I'll say a little bit about that, yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. So we are looking at potentially working with other organisations in the area, such as housing associations, because at the moment we have capability to investigate frauds in relation to the council, but a lot of organisations don't. So it's something we're looking at, whether there's actually a possibility of providing services to other organisations, and I think that will also help the overall fraud prevention message, because again, you're involving more organisations across it. It's really in its early stages at this stage, but it's something we're looking at quite seriously.
Can I just? Yeah, I do think that the structure of the team is something that is a part of something we're looking at, because we need to be structured properly so that we can deal with the data intelligence-led side of things, because that is the prevention, proactive side of things. And then you've got, in terms of the investigation, really is the reactive side. And we've been reactive, or historically we were very reactive, but obviously prevention is better than cure. So a lot of work needs to be done around how we use information, and there are lots of groups that are forming within the authority at the moment, and looking at things that we might be able to do to improve the quality of information that we've got, to be able to match data, and for it to be I don't know how to say it, for it to be better quality data that we've got, because some of the information we've got can be quite out of date. And so to be able to do that, we look at things like a local fraud hub, and a local fraud hub would mean that the partners were signed up to actually commit to putting in data and reviewing it much more frequently, so there's better data in systems, and that would go across obviously city boundaries, Huntington boundaries, so we'd get that better local picture of what's happening. But we do need to have everybody in place to be able to take it forward. You're correct, we do need to look at that.
Thank you. Just to pick up on Councillor Stobart's point, I think we're aware this is an area of the organisation that we have that's grown quite rapidly and is kind of reaching kind of new levels of maturity. I wonder, do you have a sense of where we are on our counter fraud journey as opposed to, compared to other district councils, perhaps with significant kind of housing responsibilities?
I would say that there's still a lot of work to be done. If I'm being brutally honest, we still need to work with our stakeholders to improve the understanding around due diligence and how we can work to improve the prevention side of things. So I would say that we've kind of moved past infancy. However, there's still a lot of work to be done, and I think that's really acknowledged, which is why we need to review where we've got people in place to be able to set a structure to respond to things effectively.
Thank you, that's really helpful. Sorry, I interposed that. Did you have any further comments, Councillor Stobart?
None, except to, through you, Chair, thank you for the comments, but I think just also to note that the more data that you can be looking at, then the more accurate the conclusion. So I think a broadening of the scope, within reasonable limits, just enhances what we do. So thank you.
I agree, thank you. Councillor Sanford.
Thank you. Just to follow up on Councillor Atkins' point, do you actually report number of frauds, potential frauds that come before your team? How many of those go to prosecution? Is there a KPI we can look at or a report with numbers?
So as part of our reporting, obviously we have the quarterly report that goes through to see what's been reported to us and what's been accepted. In terms of that kind of breakdown around KPI and sanctions, we don't have that. It's something that we can think about, but it's something that I'm very cautious of, to be honest with you, because we have to make sure that we make the right decisions that are based on a fair process, etc. And I do think that KPIs around particular outcomes have potential risks associated to them personally, but it's something that we can talk about. It's not something I'm quite so keen on.
Thank you. I think we do get some figures, I think, as part of the regular governance risk and control update. But yes, I suppose what would we look for in a KPI? I suppose we want assurance that the team is working proactively to identify risk and potential fraud, and that where and on the reactive side of things that the information is acted on quickly, I suppose would be the things I would want to see measured by a KPI rather than necessarily, how many people have we prosecuted recently. Although that being said, press releases around that are also obviously helpful in the overall counter fraud culture. But I think it's perhaps something to go in and have a think about, if you want to.
No, that's fine. We've got some informal KPI measurements around the sorts of things that you're talking about, from the time that somebody makes a report, if you like, to the time that it's loaded and somebody looks at that. What's important to mention at the moment is we're in the process of quite a big change. So we've got a new case management system and we're in the process of migrating information. Now, the new system should offer us new reporting tools, and now would be a really good time for us to be able to sit down with everybody to understand what kind of information is really required, because we're configuring the system at the moment, and that's something that from the outset it would be good to know what you would like reported, and then we can set those reports up to be able to deliver them to you.
Thank you. Perhaps we might discuss offline a little, and then feedbacks and recommendations on perhaps the key metrics that we'd want measured. Councillor Leeming.
Thank you, Chair. My question is about probably prevention, really, from early stages of thinking about fraud. So particularly things like scams and cybercrime, and online, in relation to online services. So I know as a council we are involved in a process of transformation and we're venturing into new ways of doing things. I wondered how embedded fraud awareness and sort of fraud protection was in the sorts of choices people were making about things like the software that we're using, the technical skill that is required to operate these systems. So I'm aware this is but when you do something new, you're exposed to new risks, and I would like us to understand people's comprehension of fraud as they're taking on new projects and things. Is this part of the culture in the organisation to discuss this up front when new things are being launched?
Okay, so I have had some interesting conversations with transformation, and it's been highlighted, obviously, that there are different risks. So although they are aware of it, so if something comes out, we have a culture of sharing. So if there's something of interest, I will forward that on to them and say, have we considered this, etc. At the moment, in terms of what they're implementing, I couldn't tell you that, if I'm brutally honest, but they are, they do speak to us, and we communicate about the kind of issues that could impact that area or the decisions that they make. But in terms of, it might be that we need to set up something a bit more formal, if that's something that people are really interested in, to be able to record what communication's gone on. I don't know what you think.
So I think this is a really interesting point, because obviously, you know, there's a lot going on in the organisation, a lot of transformation, and we need to make sure that all of the systems that we're introducing are robust, have the right fraud prevention measures within them. And I know we have had discussions on this, and my understanding is that these things are taken into account, you know, when we're doing this. But it's probably worth doing a full risk assessment on a lot of these systems, just to make sure that everything we believe should be in there is in there. Because you know, at the end of the day, the people that are introducing them, they have a bit of an understanding, but not the sort of understanding that Tara and her team have. And I think there's a lot the team have to offer in relation to fraud prevention. I think it was an interesting point that was made earlier. We are intending to change the structure of the team a bit to sort of have one part of the team looking at prevention and intelligence, and the other side looking at investigation. So there is definitely more of an emphasis now on fraud prevention than perhaps there was even 3 or 4 years ago. And we're, you know, the team are going to be adapting to meet those challenges, you know, in the short to medium term. I think it's something we need to keep an eye on, and we need to make sure that all of the systems that we bring in are properly risk assessed for fraud, and that's pretty much an ongoing piece of work, really.
Mr. Tully, did you want to come in there?
Thank you. Yeah, so I can just add, in terms, it's a really good question. In terms of sort of like fraud risk, that's one of the many determinants we have in my team when we're planning new pieces of work to take on board. So if a new system comes online, that certainly increases the risk profile in that area. So it's going to be more likely that we would have a look at reviewing that system. So although not part of the structured process you're talking about immediately, there certainly will be reviews of controls in that area. And it does sort of develop sort of quite a good proactive conversation. Sometimes people come to us in advance to seek our advice. So again, while it's not structured, there are some further sort of sources of assurance going on. And of course, we work with colleagues in the fraud team about that. Thank you.
May I ask that we make a recommendation that work between the two teams is sort of formalised as a process when new significant software or new significant systems are introduced, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further comments or questions on this report? I have one final question, which I appreciate will perhaps elicit some groans, but there's a long list of responsibilities at the bottom of this report. I wonder if all of those responsibilities are reflected in either the terms of reference or the job descriptions of the people listed, particularly as this is if I've understood your track changes correctly, this is a new section that we've added in. So I just wonder, for instance, if we were to look at Mr. Mallock's job description, whether it would have those responsibilities clearly listed and articulated, and do the terms of reference for this committee fully capture the responsibilities listed and so on and so forth. So I don't know if there's a piece of work to be done there just to make sure that it's not just in this document, but also in kind of key job descriptions and other references.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, certainly as in relation to what it says in relation to my role, I mean, I have and always have had a responsibility for the safeguarding of council assets, and part of the response to that is adequate resources in relation to the prevention and detection of fraud. This was added into the strategy. I mean, a lot of the responsibilities here will relate to job descriptions, but I'm sure our people team can double check it.
Yes,
because it is important that our job descriptions do properly reflect.
Potentially not
sort of responsibility.
all the way down to the level of of colleagues, but certainly at the kind of service managers and heads of service, exactly. I think need to have it as a key. You know, if we're going to be serious about this, it needs to be one of the key responsibilities within their job description.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think we've considered this report. I think following Councillor Howell's comments, we'd like to see some additions around licensing fraud and kind of internal fraud, or at least kind of links to key documents if that's described there, but some kind of join between them so that we don't miss that. But I think otherwise we're happy to see this report go up to Cabinet. Is that agreed? Thank you. So we've been asked to recommend the strategy to Cabinet, and we have done so. Item 9 is our regular governance risk and control update. Please can I ask Mr. Tully to present his report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Hello once again. Our quarterly update reports. I'll dive straight into it. We're on page 155 of our agenda packs, and the purpose of the report is to provide an update on topical news, items which contribute to the committee's understanding of corporate governance. The first thing to look at is on page 158, which is internal audit updates. There are 3 pieces of work to feed back on to the committee. I'll probably talk about 2 together, both the information governance and risk management pieces of work. They're not regular audits, so I'll just talk about and explain those to you. They're what I would refer to as sort of continuous embedded assurance. And by that, what it means is that I work with colleagues throughout the year continuously, partly because they're important areas, but the benefit is that I can provide feedback in sort of real time to them. But what I like to do, it's an opportunity, as we've got to sort of like the end of the financial year and beyond, it's an opportunity to at least conclude on the work that I've done, because it enables me to provide an opinion on the level of assurance in those frameworks and systems. So I just wanted to report those back to the committee that they are both okay, and I can provide reasonable assurance on those. And then the third one is the housing revenue account tenant satisfaction measures, data quality. So there's a new requirement to submit data to the housing regulator. So it's prudent to complete an independent check of that data as it was submitted. And we did a test of that very recently. I'd like to provide full assurance, but it's a very, very new system. It's a new emerging area. So there may be sort of like lessons learned nationally from this sort of process. But certainly the feedback from my member of my team, my auditor, is that they were very well prepared for this, and the data quality was very good indeed. So that's a positive piece of news. Moving on to page 160, just a quick update on the independent member. We advertised and started that process, but unfortunately we couldn't shortlist any suitable candidates from that first recruitment round, which is a shame. So we're going to be going out to advert again. Peter and I are going to be working on that. We're also considering alternative places to advertise so we can sort of like broaden the exposure and perhaps get a few more interested candidates, but we're just give you assurance to the committee that we are very much continuing with that process. On page 161, we have our regular counter fraud updates with some of the key performance indicators that my colleague Tara referred to earlier on. And then finally on page 165, where we have the topical updates, just a couple there. One, noting the impact of the general election upon the process of external audits, which my colleague across the room mentioned earlier on in his report, so I won't talk a lot about that. But secondly, just to be aware that the Local Government Association have recently published a framework designed to support local authorities understanding assurance, and that is a document which we're taking into account as part of our ongoing sort of review of governance. So that's very positive, but worth being aware of. And that was it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tully. Are there any comments or questions on this report? Councillor Stobart.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So, I was drawn to this first entry of the internal audit updates, the tenant satisfaction measures, because it was new, because it was addressed, in a, what appears to be a balanced and progressive way. I'm just interested, you refer to a report, sorry, through you, Chair, Mr. Tully, you refer to a report. There are reports, I guess, that sit internally, get circulated amongst, the leadership team and others. Is that the case? I mean, so is the learning, if you will, that's generated from this kind of what appears to be a very good experience, is that being propagated appropriately through circulation of the report or a summary? I mean, we're seeing a useful summary here. But how does that information get about the organisation? And you talked about, being very well prepared for this. Again, any lessons learned, in the run-up to this about preparedness for such initiatives?
Thank you, through you, Chair. Yes, absolutely. It's absolutely a good, valid point. Where there is good practice, we should share that. We do have various sort of like networks in the council. And I think that would be a good one to perhaps take away and celebrate, and say this has worked well. I think around the preparedness element of your comment there, what my auditor fed back to me is that they're working on this for a long time, where I know that some other councils were perhaps leaving it up to the 11th hour and the last minute. And that was very sensible, because it gives you sort of like an opportunity, a bit like accounts really, to have a bit of a soft close and sort of like tweak processes as you go along. Because where there's a dependency on trying to get data from other sources, that's something that perhaps can be a little bit out of your control. And that was one thing we noticed. There was perhaps scope for review and improvement where we're taking data from some other sources. Just, smarter ways of getting the data, and learning better ways to query the system, and perhaps get a few more automated reports in progress. But yeah, it's overall very positive.
So just a supplementary then. Lessons learned, being ready for the next time. Do you get a good view of what's coming? Obviously in this case you did, and you could prepare. Are the resources there? Do you have the flexibility in the team to be able to address these things with, in plenty of time?
Thank you. Yeah, no, an excellent question. Sometimes we don't. The pace of change is quite rapid sometimes. And we do our utmost. We do our best to forward plan and have a radar of potential work, looking at things coming over the horizon, looking at legislation changes and things like that. But we don't always get it right. And so sometimes things do happen at the last moment. And in such case, then we have to make a judgment call. Is this a bit of work that we should prioritise over something else? And if that's the case, it could be that another bit of work just gets momentarily postponed, delayed. So we've got the capability to adapt our plan and be agile. But yeah.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions, Mr. Tully? No? Well, thank you for bringing the report today. We've been asked to note the governance risk and control update, and we have done so. Thank you. Item 10, and the last substantive item, is the Treasury Management Annual Report for 2023-24, which is for approval by the committee. Please can Mr. Maddock present the report.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the annual report for the financial year that ended 31st of March 2024. You'll see within the report there's a number of tables. So, for example, at paragraph 5, there's a sort of summary table there of our borrowings, and also shows what our investments is. So it shows our net position at paragraph 5. Paragraph 6, there's a bit more of a detailed breakdown of the figure in the first table. There's also some statistics around interest payable, contributions to reserve, minimum revenue provision, etc., which is shown at paragraph 23, and some figures from our benchmarking. You'll also see at paragraph 31 a table around our capital financing requirement, which is basically the council's need to borrow. And then you'll see there's other details around our investments under liquidity risk on page 175. And then right at the back, there's commentary from our Treasury advisor. So we usually include a commentary from them on the state of the economy, interest rates, and their general outlook. So if there's any questions on anything specific there, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you very much. Councillor Stobart.
Chair, thank you. So it was paragraph 24, and I think we discussed it, the reserve funds. But I was wondering, with the delay to something like the Waterbeach solar project, what are the wider implications, if any? It was budgeted for and then didn't happen. It seems like quite a benign situation, but I just wanted to dig a little and see what the implications would be for the whole Treasury management process.
So when we do our Treasury management forecasting and our cash forecasting, we will make an assumption in that as to when we think the cash is going to be needed. Now, we do update it on a fairly regular basis, so as we find out that things are shifting, then obviously we update our cash flow. Potentially it means we have more money we can invest because we haven't spent the money, or potentially less money we needed to borrow because we haven't spent the money, depending on which situation applies. And actually, yeah, so the reserve was assuming we'd have taken money from our renewables reserve for the REN project, but obviously we haven't had to, so that reserve is obviously higher, as we saw earlier in the accounts, than actually we had originally anticipated. So I suppose the broad effect is that potentially we're holding on to money a little bit longer than we might have thought we'd done, which helps our investment balances potentially. But I mean, there's to be honest, we often get slippage within the capital programme, so it's not just this project. We've had slippage a bit on our council house building project as well. So again, it means we've held onto the cash a little bit longer, but obviously will eventually get spent. So in theory, we made a little bit more money on our investments in relation to those, or not had to borrow quite as early as we would have done. But obviously, in the longer term, it will all correct itself, and we will potentially spend this money because it will happen.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions for Mr. Maddock on this report? Councillor Leeming.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Maddock, I'm just looking at paragraph 27 on page 172, and it's discussing the shift in risk, in the risk profile, the credit risk. And we've gone from the 31st of March, where our average credit risk is lower than our comparators, to the 31st of March 24, where we're higher. And it's because we've shifted from lending to local authorities to banks. What was the reason why we made that decision? Is it just a sort of snapshot in time, or was it a conscious choice to do that in that way, please?
It is a snapshot in time, and sometimes the end of a financial year can be a little bit of a false position to take. To be honest, we've found slightly better rates with banks than we have with local authorities. Interestingly enough, the rates we can get with local authorities do vary. They don't necessarily track interest rates in the general market. So, for example, towards the end of the financial year, local authorities tend to be asking for money. It does vary, and it really is driven by, the sort of assessment of the rate that we can get at that point in time. And it does. There's not always a rhyme or reason that's obvious as to why we get better rates with banks or whether we get better rates with local authorities. We have got fewer counterparties at the moment because we've got less money tied up in investments, and we have had to borrow for our housing revenue account. You may have noticed that in the report for our house building programme. So there is less money invested at the moment. But it really depends on the assessment of risk, the assessment of liquidity and rates at the point in time. And at any point in time, I'm not sure what the position is at the moment, but I suspect when we look, it'll be somewhat different.
Thank you, Mr. Maddock. And sort of a continuation to that, Appendix A, all of these, this is a list of all the local authorities and banks that we have used during the year. Are these, this isn't a snapshot in time, this could be, this is what I'm assuming, that these could be people that we've had transactions with at some point during that financial year, but it's not the end point of the year.
Yeah, that's right. So those are all the organisations we've transacted with at some point. And as I say, a lot of them will have matured now.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions on the Treasury Management Report? No? So we've been asked, thank you, Mr. Maddock, we've been asked to approve the Treasury Management Annual Report for 23-24. Can we take that by affirmation? Thank you very much indeed. Agenda item 11 is matters of topical interest. So any officers, auditors or members who wish to raise any matters not previously covered in the meeting today. Does anybody have anything additional they would like to raise at this point? Doesn't look like it. So thank you all very much for your attendance and your contributions today. It's much appreciated. The next meeting of the committee is scheduled to take place on Thursday, the 26th of September at 10 o'clock in the morning. Thank you all very much.